25 October. I promised myself I'd write about my visit to Paris today and then go on to my journey through Lyon, Avignon, and Nice, then on to Genoa, and how I found myself a guest in Mangiavaca's house again, though we hadn't parted very good friends. But something has happened that preoccupies me, and I don't know if I still have the patience to go back over the past. For the moment, anyway, I shall stop writing about even the recent past and concentrate on a journey still to come. I've met Domenico again. He came to see his partner, and as Gregorio was out, it was I who sat with him. We started by going over shared memories, in particular the January night when, trembling with cold and fear in the sack I'd been shut up in, I hoisted aboard Domenico's ship, on which I was brought to Genoa. After the humiliation in Chios, and instead of the death I expected, Genoa. And after the fire of London, Genoa. It's here I'm reborn every time, as in that game they play in Florence where the losers have to go back to the beginning. As I was talking to Domenico, I had a feeling that this smuggler captain had a great admiration for me, though I don't think I deserve it. The reason is that I risked my life for the love of a woman, whereas he and his men, though they trifle with death on every voyage, do so only for gain. He asked me whether I had any news of my beloved, if she was still a prisoner, and if I still hoped to get her back again. I swore to him that I thought of her day and night wherever I was, in Genoa, London, or Paris, or at sea, and that I'd never give up trying to get her out of the clutches of her persecutor. How do you hope to do it? I answered without thinking. One day I'll set out with you. You'll drop me exactly where you picked me up before, and I'll manage somehow to get to speak to her. I sail 3 days from now. If you're still of the same mind, you're welcome to come with me, and I'll do all I can to help you. As I started stammering my thanks, he did his best to play down his generosity. Oh, well, if the Turks ever decide to get hold of me, I'll be impaled one day anyhow, because of all the mastic I've filched from them illegally in the last 20 years. It won't get me either a pardon or a worse punishment, whether I help you or not. They can't impale me twice. I was carried away by so much courage and magnanimity. I got up, shook him warmly by the hand, and embraced him like a brother. We were still hugging one another when Gregorio came in. Well, Domenico, he said, are you coming or going? It's a reunion, replied the Calabrian. They started talking business, florins, bales, cargoes, ships, storms, ports of call. I was so absorbed in my own thoughts that I no longer heard them. 26 October. Today I got drunker than I've ever been before, and all because Gregorio had just received 6 casks of Vernaccia from his steward, produced in his own vineyards at Cinquanterre. He wanted to taste the wine straight away, and I was the only drinking companion handy. When we were both very tipsy, Master Mangiavaca extracted a promise from me. He framed its terms, but I agreed to it with my hand on the Gospels. I undertake to go to Chios with Domenico. If I can't manage to get Marta away from her husband, I give up trying to get her back. I then go back to Giblet to sort my affairs, to settle what needs to be settled, sell what needs to be sold, and hand my business over to my sister's children. Then, in the spring, I come back to live in Genoa, to marry Giacominetta in great style in Santa Croce, and work with Gregorio, who'll now really be my father-in-law. So my future seems settled for the coming months on for the rest of my life, but in addition to my name and that of Gregorio at the bottom of it, the agreement needs the signature of God. 27 October. Gregorio candidly admits that he got me drunk to make me promise. That makes him laugh. What's more, he managed to make me confirm my undertaking when I woke up and was sober. sober, but still very confused in mind and queasy in my stomach. What a stupid way to behave when I am due to leave tomorrow. How can I go aboard like this, as good as seasick already? I can hardly even stand. I can hardly even stand on dry land. Perhaps Gregorio was really trying to stop me going. With him, nothing would surprise me, but he won't get away with it. I shall go and I shall see Marta again and get to know my child. I admit I love Genoa, but I can love it just as well from across the sea as I've always done and my ancestors before me. At sea, Sunday, 31 October 1666. A strong northeast wind blew us off course to Sardinia. We'd been making for Calabria. As this ship, so the ship of my life. When we berthed, the hull crashed into the quay and we feared the worst, but some divers went down to investigate, lit by the slanting morning sun, and when they surfaced again, they told us the Charybdis was unscathed, so we're setting off again. At sea, 9 November. The sea is rough all the time and I am constantly ill. Many old sailors are suffering just as much as I am, if that's any consolation. Every evening between bouts of sickness I pray that nature may be kinder to us, and now Domenico tells me he prays for the opposite. His prayers are clearly heard more sympathetically than mine. And now that he has explained his reasons, I'll probably follow his example. So long as the sea is rough, he says, we are safe. Even if the Coast Guard saw us, they wouldn't risk trying to come after us. That's why I prefer to go to sea in winter. Then I have only one enemy, the sea, and that's not the one I fear the most. Even if it decided to take my life, that wouldn't be such a misfortune. It would save me from being impaled, which is what I am in for if I'm ever arrested. But death at sea is just a human fate, like death in battle. Whereas impalement makes a man curse the woman who gave him birth. This speech so reconciled me with the swell that I went and leaned on the rail, letting the spray blow in my face and enjoying the taste of salt on my tongue. It's the taste of life, of beer in London's taverns and of women's lips. I breathe deeply and I am steady on my legs. At sea, 17 November. Several times in recent days I've opened this journal only to shut it again, partly because I have been suffering from dizziness since I left Genoa and that saps my energy, and partly because my mind is restless and I can't concentrate. I've tried to open the 100th name too, thinking it mightn't rebuff me this time, and then I'd be able to make some headway. But every time my eyes went dark straight away, and I've shut it up again, vowing that I shan't try to read it at all unless it opens for me of its own accord. Since then, I've spent my time walking on the deck and talking to Domenico and his men, who tell me about their favorite narrow squeaks and teach me as if I were a lad about masts and yards and rigging. I take all my meals with them, laugh at their jokes even if I only half understand them, and when they drink I pretend to drink too, but I only pretend. Ever since Gregorio got me drunk on his casks of wine, I feel very fragile and so close to actual nausea. I am sure one sip would tip the balance. What's more, that Vernaccio was pure ambrosia, whereas the wine we get on the ship is a kind of syrupy vinegar diluted with seawater. At sea, 27 November. We are approaching the coast of Chios like a hunter stalking his prey. The sails are furled, the mast has been lowered quietly, and the sailors keep their voices lower than usual, as if they could be heard from the island. Unfortunately, it's a fine day. A leaden sun hangs in the sky over Asia Minor, and the wind has dropped. Only a trace of cold air from last night reminds us it will soon be winter. Domenico has decided not to move till tonight. He has told me how he means to proceed. Two men, Yanis and Demetrios, will row to the island under cover of darkness. They're both Greek, but from Sicily. When they get to the village of Cataractes, they'll contact their local supplier who'll have the goods ready for them. If all goes according to plan, with the mastic ready and packed and the customs men persuaded to turn a blind eye and no traps are suspected, the two scouts will send Domenico a signal. White cloth is spread out on a patch of high ground at noon. Then the ship will get ready to come in close, but only after dark and only briefly. The cargo will be loaded and paid for, and the Charybdis will be off before the first light. If by some mischance the white cloth didn't appear, the ship would stay where it was, waiting for the Greeks to return. If they weren't in sight by first light, the rest of the crew would sail without them, praying for their lost souls. That's the usual arrangement. But this time it's to be modified because of me. Domenico's plan is. No, I mustn't talk about it. I mustn't even think of it until my hopes are fulfilled and fulfilled without harm to my friends. Until then, I'll just cross my fingers and spit in the sea like Domenico and muttering like him by my ancestors. 28th November. I can't remember any other Sunday when I've prayed so fervently. Yanis and Demetrius's boat was launched during the night, and all the crew watched until it vanished into the dark. We could still hear the slap of the oars, and Domenico was worried because everything was so quiet. A bit later in the night, when I was already in bed, there were dozens of flashes of lightning in succession. They seemed to be coming from the north and from a long way away, because we didn't hear the sound of the thunder. Everyone on board has spent all day waiting. In the morning, waiting to spot the white cloth. Since then, waiting for dark so that we can draw in to the coast. I share in everyone else's suspense, and I also have tensions of my own. My mind is full of them all the time, but I daren't write anything about them. I do hope that. 29 November. Last night our boat anchored for a while in an inlet near the village of Cataractes. Domenico has told me it's exactly the same spot as the one where, nearly 10 months ago, he took delivery of the sack I was tied up in. Then I could hear all kinds of noises around me but couldn't see anything. Last night I could make out shapes coming and going, bustling about and waving their arms both on the boat and on the beach, and all the sounds that had been unintelligible to me in January, now I could recognize them. The casting of the gangway, the mastic being set down, checked, loaded, the supplier, a man named Saleh, a Turk or perhaps a renegade Greek coming on board for a drink and to be paid. Perhaps at this point I ought to repeat that Chios is almost the only place in the world that produces mastic, but the authorities make the peasant hand all of it over to them for the Sultan's harems. The state fixes the price to suit itself and pays when it feels like it. Sometimes the peasants have to wait several years to get what they're owed, which forces them into debt in the interval. Domenico buys their mastic from them at twice, 3 times, or even 5 times the official price and hands over the full amount on delivery. According to him, he contributes much more than the Ottoman government to the island's prosperity. Need I that for the authorities Need I add that for the authorities this devil of a Calabrian is an enemy to be captured and hanged or impaled, while for the peasants on the island and everyone else who profits from this trade, Domenico is a godsend, manna from heaven. On nights like last night, they wait for him more eagerly than for Christmas, but they're frightened, too. Or if the smuggler or his suppliers were intercepted, the entire harvest would be lost and whole families reduced to want. The whole operation didn't last more than 2 or 3 hours at most. And when I saw Saleh embrace Domenico and with the aid of a helping hand totter down the gangway, I thought we were about to set sail. I couldn't help asking one of the sailors if this was so. He answered laconically that Demetrius wasn't back yet and we would wait for him. Before long, I saw a lamp on the beach and 3 men approaching in a single file. The first was Demetrios. The second was carrying the light so I could see his face fairly clearly, but I didn't know him. The third was Marta's husband. Domenico had told me to stay out of sight and not show any sign of my presence until he called me by my name. He'd stationed me behind a partition where I could hear every word of their conversation, which was conducted in a mixture of Italian and Greek. I should say, by way of introduction to what follows, that it was obvious from the outset that Sayyaf knew perfectly well who Domenico was, and he addressed him with respect, if not fear, as a village priest might address a visiting bishop. I suppose that's rather an irreligious comparison. I only meant that there's just as clear a sense of hierarchy in the underworld as in the most venerable institutions. When a village brigand meets the boldest smuggler in the Mediterranean, he takes care not to behave disrespectfully, and the other takes care not to treat him as an equal. The tone was straight away when Marta's husband, after waiting in vain for his host to tell him why he'd been summoned, finally said himself in what sounded to me a hesitant voice, "Your man Demetrius told me you had a cargo of cloth, coffee, and pepper that you're ready to sell cheap." Silence from Domenico. A sigh, then as one tosses a damaged coin to a beggar. If he said so, it must be true. The conversation collapsed again. Sayyaf was obliged to bend down and pick it up. Demetrius said I could pay a third today and the rest at Easter. Domenico, after a pause. If he said so, it must be true. The other eagerly. He mentioned 10 bags of coffee and 2 kegs of pepper. I'll take the lot, but I need to see the cloth before I decide about that. Domenico. It's too dark. You can see everything tomorrow in the daylight. The other. I can't come back tomorrow, and even for you, it would be dangerous to wait. Domenico. Who said anything about waiting or coming back? Come out to sea with us, and in the morning you can check everything. Feel it, count it, taste it. I could hear the quiver of fear in Sayyaf's voice, all the better because I couldn't see him. I didn't ask to check the goods. I trust you. I just wanted to look at the cloth to see how much I could sell. But it doesn't matter. I don't want to hold you up. You must be in a hurry to get away from the coast. Domenico. We are away from the coast already. Sayyaf. And how will you unload the merchandise? Domenico. Better ask yourself how we're going to be able to unload you. How? I wonder. I could come back in a small boat. I'm not so sure. Do you mean to keep me here against my will? Oh no, no question of that. But nor is there any question of your taking any one of my boats against my will. You must ask if I'll kindly lend you one. Will you lend me one of your boats? I'll have to think it over. I then heard the sound of a brief altercation. I guessed that Sayyaf and his henchmen had tried to run away, but the sailors surrounding them soon overpowered them. I almost felt sorry for Marta's husband, but not for long. Why did you send for me? What do you want of me? He said with the last vestige of courage. Domenico didn't answer. I am your guest. You asked me on your boat and now you try to take me prisoner. Shame on you. Some imprecations in Arabic followed. The Calabrian still said nothing, then slowly he started to speak. We haven't done anything wrong. We haven't done anything more than an angler does. He casts his hook, and when he hauls in a fish, he has to decide whether to keep it or throw it back into the sea. We cast our hook, and the fat fish bit. And I am the fat fish? You're the fat fish. I don't know yet if I'll keep you on the boat or throw you back in the sea. I'll let you choose. Which would you prefer? Sayyaf said nothing. Presented with such alternatives, what could he say? The sailors standing round were laughing, but Domenico made them stop. I'm waiting for an answer. Do I keep you here or throw you in the sea? On the boat, grumbled the other. It sounded like resignation, capitulation, and Domenico recognized it as such. Good. Now we can talk properly. I recently met a Genoese who told me an odd story about you. Apparently you're holding a woman prisoner in your house and you beat her and ill-treat her child. Embriaco, that liar, that scorpion. He's already been to my house with a Turkish officer and they saw it. I wasn't ill-treating her. Anyhow, she's my wife, and what happens under my roof is my business. It was at this point that Domenico called me. Signore Balthasar! I emerged from my hiding place and saw that Sayyaf and his henchmen were sitting on the ground leaning against some ropes. They weren't tied up, but a dozen or so sailors stood around, ready to knock them down if they tried to get up. Marta's husband shot me a look that seemed to hold more menace than contrition. Marta's my cousin, and when I saw her at the beginning of the year, she told me she was pregnant. If she and her child are well, no one will hurt you. She's not your cousin, and she is well. And her child? What child? We've never had any children. Are you sure it's my wife you're talking about? He's lying, I said. I intended to go on, but a kind of dizzy spell made me have to lean against the nearest wall, so it was Domenico who continued. How can we tell you weren't lying? Sayyaf turned to his companion, who confirmed what he'd said. If you have told the truth, both of you, said the Calabrian, you'll be at home tomorrow and I shan't bother you again, but we must be sure. So here's what I suggest. What's your name? Stavro, said the henchman, looking in my direction. I recognized him now. I'd only caught a glimpse of him before when I went to Marta's husband's house with the Janissaries. He was the man Sayyaf signed to go and fetch his wife while I was shouting and bawling. I meant to behave differently now. Listen to me, Stavro, said Domenico, suddenly less disagreeable. I want you to go and fetch Signore Balthasar's cousin. As soon as she's confirmed what her husband says, they can both go. As for yourself, if you do as I tell you, you needn't even come back on board. Just bring her back to the beach tomorrow evening and we'll come and fetch her in a boat. You can just go home and you'll have nothing to fear. But if by any mischance the devil should put it into your head to deceive me, just remember that there are 600 families on this island who live on what I pay them, and that the highest authorities are beholden to me too. So if you talk too much or if you disappear without bringing the woman back to us, I shall pass the word and you'll be made to pay for your treachery. And the blows will come from where you least expect them. I want to deceive you. As they launched the boat again with Stavro in it and three sailors to escort him to the shore, I asked Domenico if he really thought the fellow would do what he'd been asked. He seemed quite confident. If he just disappeared without more ado, there's nothing I could do. But I think I've put the fear of God into him, and what I've asked him to do won't cost him anything, so he may very well do as he's told. We'll soon see. We're out at sea again, and nothing seems to be stirring on the island. Yet somewhere behind one of those white walls, in the shade of one or the other of those tall trees, Marta is getting ready to come to the beach. Has she been told I'm here, or why she's been sent for? She's dressing, making up her face, perhaps even putting a few things in her bag. Is she anxious, frightened, or full of hope? Is she thinking of her husband at this moment, or of me and her child? Is it with her? Did she lose it? Has it been taken away from her? At last I shall know. I shall be able to bandage her wounds. I shall be able to make amends. Night's starting to fall, and I go on riding without a light. The boat is moving cautiously towards the island, though it's still some way off. Domenico has stationed a sailor called Ramdane from Alexandria at the top of the mast. He has the keenest eyes of all the crew, and it's his job to watch the beach and signal anything suspicious. It's because of me that everyone has to take excessive risks, but none of them shows any resentment. I haven't caught a single look of reproach or sigh of irritation. How on earth can I ever repay them? We're getting nearer the coast, but the lights on the island still seem as faint as the furthest stars in the sky. Of course, we can't light any candles or lamps on board ship. I can hardly see the paper I'm writing on, but I go on all the same. But tonight, writing doesn't give me as much pleasure as usual. On other days, I write to record events or to explain myself or to clear my mind in the same way as one clears one's throat, or so as not to forget, or even just because I promised myself I would. But tonight I cling to the pages as if a boy. I haven't anything to tell them, but I need them near me. My pen holds my hand. What does it matter if I dip it just in the black of the night? Off Cataractis, 30 November 1666. I didn't think our reunion would be like this. I, eyes screwed up on the boat, she, the dim glow of a lantern at midnight on a beach. When the lantern started moving from right to left to right like the pendulum of a clock, Domenico ordered 3 men to launch the dinghy. They were to use no lights and be very careful scanning the coast to make sure there were no traps or ambushes. The sea was rough and noisy but not raging. The wind was from the north and already typical of December. On my cold lips salt and prayers. Marta. How near she was and yet how far still. The dinghy took a lifetime to reach the beach and then stayed there for another lifetime. What were they doing? What could they be talking about? It's not difficult to take a person on board and then come back again. Why didn't I go with them? No, Domenico wouldn't have let me, and he'd have been right. I haven't got the practical experience that his men possess, nor their equanimity. Then the dinghy did come back towards us. The lantern could be seen on board. God, I said no lights, Domenico muttered. As if they'd heard, they put the flame out. Domenico heaved a loud sigh and patted me on my arm. By my ancestors. Then he ordered his men to get ready to head out to sea as soon as we'd picked up the dinghy and its occupants. Marta was hauled on board in a highly unceremonious manner, with the aid of a rope to which a plank was attached for her to stand on. When she'd been hoisted up far enough, I helped her step over the rail. She'd given me her hand as if to a stranger, but as soon as she was safe on deck, she began to look round, and although it was dark, I could tell she was looking for me. I said one word, her name, and she took my hand again, clasping it quite differently now. She'd obviously known I was there, though I am still not sure whether it was her husband's henchmen who told her or the sailors who picked her up from the beach. I'll find out when I have a chance to speak to her. No, no point. We'll have so many other things to talk about. I'd imagined that when we were reunited, I'd take her in my arms and hold her tight for a long, long time. But with all those bold mariners round us and her husband still on board, waiting to be tried by our court of pirates, it would have been in bad taste to seem too intimate or eager. So the surreptitious pressure of her hand on mine in the dark was the only evidence of our closeness. Then she felt unwell, so I told her to cool her face by holding it in the spray. But she began to shiver, and the sailor said she ought to stretch out on the mattress in the hold under some warm blankets. Domenico would have liked to summon her straight away to find out what had become of the child she'd been carrying, to pronounce judgment, and then sail back to his home. But she looked ready to give up the ghost, so she resigned himself to letting her rest till the morning. As soon as she was lying down, she fell asleep, so fast I thought she'd fainted. I shook her a bit to make her open her eyes and say something, then I felt ashamed of myself and came away. I spent last night propped up on some bags of mastic, trying without so much success to get to sleep. I may have managed to drop off for a few minutes just before dawn. During this seemingly endless night, while I was neither fully awake nor fully asleep, I was assailed by the most horrible thoughts. They terrify me so much I hardly dare write them down, but they arose out of my greatest joy. I found myself wondering what I ought to do to Sayaf if I found out what he'd done to Marta, let alone the child she'd been carrying any harm. Could I just let him escape unpunished? Shouldn't I make him pay for his crime? Anyhow, I thought, even if Marta's husband had nothing to do with the child's death, how could I go off and live with her in Giblet, leaving Sayaf behind to keep mulling over his revenge and return one day to haunt us? Could I sleep easy in my bed knowing he was still alive? Could I sleep easy in my bed if... Should I kill him? I kill him? I, Balthasar, kill a man, whoever he is? And to start with, how does one set about it? Me, creep up to someone with a knife in my hand and stab him through the heart, or wait till he's asleep for fear he might look at me? No, God, no. What about paying someone else to... What am I thinking? What am I writing? Lord, let this cup pass from me. It seems to me I shall never sleep again, either tonight or any of the nights that remain to me. Sunday, 5 December 1666. I shan't reread the last few pages. I might be tempted to tear them up. I wrote them, but I'm not proud of them. I am not proud of having contemplated sullying my hands and my soul, and I am not proud of having decided against it either. While Marta was still asleep, and to assuage my impatience, I wrote down the thoughts that visited me before dawn on Tuesday. Then, for the next 5 days, I wrote nothing. I even considered once again abandoning my journal, yet here I am again, pen in hand, perhaps because of the rash promise I made myself at the start of my journey. I've had 3 attacks of mental disarray, one after the other, in the last week. The first came when Marta and I were reunited. the next in the confusion that followed, and after that, the fury, the spiritual storm that's raging in me now, shaking and battering me as if I were on deck in a gale with nothing to cling on to, lifting me up every so often, only to throw me down harder. Neither Domenico nor Marta can help me now, nor anyone else, present or absent, nor any memory. Everything that comes into my mind adds to my confusion, and so does everything around me. Everything I can see and everything I can manage to remember. And of course, this year itself, this accursed year, only 4 weeks of it are left, but those 4 weeks seem simply insurmountable. An ocean without sun or moon or stars, just wave after wave after wave as far as the horizon. No, I'm still in no fit state to write. 10 December. Our boat has left Chios behind, and my mind too is beginning to distance itself from all that happened to me there. It will take more time yet for the wound to heal, but after 10 days I can at last think of something else sometimes. Perhaps I ought to try go on with my journal. Up till now I haven't been able to give a proper account of what happened, but it's time I did so, even if when I come to the most painful moments I have to confine myself to words devoid of feeling. He said, he asked, she said, seeing that, it was agreed. When Marta came on board the Charybdis, Domenico would have liked to send for her during the night and find out what had become of the child she'd been carrying, deliver his verdict, and set out straight away back to Italy. But as she could scarcely stand, he resigned himself, as I have already said, to letting her sleep for a while. Everyone on the boat had a few hours' rest apart from the lookout in case some Ottoman ship should decide to intercept us. But the sea was so rough that night we must have been the only vessel there. In the morning we met again in the captain's quarters. Demetrios and Yanis were there too, making 5 of us in all. Domenico solemnly asked Marta if she preferred to be questioned in her husband's presence or without him. I translated the question for her into the Arabic that's spoken in Giblet, and she said at once, almost imploringly, "Without him." Her expression and the way she wrung her hands made it unnecessary for me to translate her answer. So Domenico went on. "Signore Balthasar has told us you were pregnant when you came to Chios last January, but your husband maintains you've never had a child." Marta looked stricken. She turned to me for a moment, then hid her face in her hands and began to sob. I took a step towards her, but Domenico, taking his role as judge seriously, signed to me to stay where I was. He also signed to the others not to say or do anything, just to wait. When he thought he'd given the witness enough time to collect herself, he said, "Go on." I translated, adding, "Speak. There's nothing to be afraid of. No one's going to hurt you." But my words, instead of reassuring her, seemed to upset her even more. Her sobs grew louder. Domenico told me not to add anything to what he asked me to translate. I promised I wouldn't. A few seconds went by. Marta's sobbing died down, and Domenico, with a tinge of impatience, repeated his question. Then Marta looked up and said, "I've never had a child." "What do you mean?" I cried it out loud. Domenico called me to order. I apologized again, then translated just what Marta had said. Then she said in a steady voice, "There was never a child. I was never pregnant." "But you told me you were." "Yes, because I thought I was, but I was mistaken." I looked at her for a long time, but couldn't once catch her eye. I wanted to see something that resembled the truth in her look, at least to understand whether she'd lied to me all along. If she'd lied to me only about the child, to make me take her back as fast as possible to her scoundrel of a husband. What if she was lying to me now? She only raised her eyes 2 or 3 times furtively, probably to see if I was still looking at her, and if I believed her. Then Domenico asked her in a fatherly manner, "Tell us, Marta, do you want to go ashore, back to your husband, or to come with us?" I translated as, "Come back with me," but she answered clearly, pointing that she wanted to go back to Cataractes. With the man she hates? I didn't understand. Then suddenly it struck me. "Wait, Domenico," I said. "I think I understand what's going on. Her son must be on the island, and she's afraid something would happen to him if she said anything against her husband. Tell her, if that's what she's afraid of, we'll make her husband send for the child just as we made him send for her. Only she will go for the child, and will hold on to her husband until she comes back. Then he won't be able to do anything to her." "Calm down," said the Calabrian. "I think all that may be just make believe. But if you have the slightest doubt, I want you to say to her what you've just said to me. And you can promise her in my name that no harm will come either to her or to her son." I then launched into a long tirade, at once passionate, desperate, and imploring, begging Marta to tell me the truth. She listened with her eyes downcast. When I'd finished, she looked at Domenico and said, "There was never a child. I never was pregnant. I can't have children." She'd spoken in Arabic. She repeated what she'd said in faulty Greek, turning to Demetrius. Domenico glanced at him inquiringly. The sailor, who so far had remained silent, looked embarrassed. His eyes turned first to me, then to Marta, then to me again, and finally to his captain. "When I went to their house," he said, "I didn't get the impression there was a child around. It was the middle of the night. He'd have been asleep. I banged the door and woke everyone up. There was a great commotion, but I didn't hear a baby crying." I tried to speak, but Domenico stopped me. "That'll do. In my opinion, the woman's telling the truth. We must let her and her husband go." "Not yet. Wait." "No, Balthasar, I won't wait. The matter's settled. We're leaving. We've already made ourselves late to please you, and I hope one day you'll remember to thank all the men who risked great danger for your sake." These words hurt me more than Domenico could have imagined. I had been a hero to him, and now he saw me as a jilted lover, whining and making things up. In a few hours, a few minutes, or a few words even, the noble and honorable Signore Balthasar had become a nuisance, a troublesome passenger, barely tolerated, whom you could tell to be quiet. If I went to weep in a corner away from everybody, it was as much because of that as because of Marta. She left as soon as the questioning was over. I suppose Domenico apologized to her husband, and I think he offered them dinghy to take them back to the shore. I didn't want to be present at the farewells. My wound was closed a little by now. Though it's still very painful, I still don't understand Marta's behavior. I ask myself questions so strange I don't like to write them down. I still need to think.